perhaps also good evening to our partners, colleagues, friends of the United Nations Environment Program and the 10-year framework of program, Sustainable Consumption and Production, the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, the Farm Project, the International Ecosystems Management Partnership, and all the organizations that have come together to support this first webinar associated to the implementation of UNEA 6 Resolution 1 entitled Circularity of a Resilient Low-Carbon Sugarcane and Agro-Industry. The purpose of this webinar that we are hosting today is to discuss an important topic: advancing circular, regenerative, and bioeconomy approaches in agricultural value chains. My name is Jorge Laguna Celis, and I'm the head of the Secretariat of the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. As I was mentioning, this first webinar in a series which will help us share knowledge and practical examples on how circular, regenerative, and bioeconomy approaches can be applied in the agri-food industry. These webinars are designed as a collaboration between, I already mentioned, the One Planet Network, the International Ecosystems Management Partnership, and the GEF Financing Agrochemical Reduction and Management Farm Global Child Project. The series was created to deliver on Resolution 1 of the 6th United Nations Environmental Assembly on circularity of a resilient low-carbon sugarcane agro-industry. This resolution, which we are posting in the chat, recognizes that the agro-industry of sugarcane, among other crops and forests, when sustainably produced and managed while avoiding potential human harmful effects on the environment, can be a source of food, raw materials, biomaterials, and bioenergy, therefore providing win-win solutions and opportunities for climate mitigation, biodiversity protection, and reduction of pollution. We are convinced here, and all of us participating in this webinar, we are convinced that advancing towards the transformation of our food systems from a sustainability perspective and using the advantages that circular economy approaches can give win-win solutions for people and planet. Why is it important to advance in circularity and regenerative approaches in agriculture? Number one, agriculture is the single biggest anthropogenic source of methane emissions. Secondly, because the agri-food system is a major cause of ecosystems degradation, land use, and a driver of climate change. We do know that today's food systems generate over 12 trillion in hidden social, economic, and environmental costs, which more than half of these are attributed to unhealthy diets and harmful farming practices. And yet, we do know that 80% of the world's poorest and most food insecure people live in rural areas and rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. It is therefore a priority that increasing circularity, introducing regenerative approaches, and developing bioeconomy generates numerous benefits. And let's look, before we start our webinar, to the top 3 benefits that we would like to highlight. We know that a circular economy for food could reduce global food sector emissions by over 49% by 2050 and decrease the health costs associated to the current system and generate annual benefits worth of $2.7 trillion by 2050. We also know that adopting circular thinking has the potential not only to slow and eventually halt biodiversity loss, but also reverse its decline by working with natural cycles to maintain the stock of natural capital and allow regeneration of the biosphere. We also know that regenerative food production practices support the development of healthy soils. It allows them to be more productive and result in food improvement based on micronutrient content. And finally, what we are going to discover in this series of webinars, first, second, and third webinar, which we are planning to organize in the months to come, it is that by harnessing the power of circular economy approaches, we are also strengthening the fabric of our rural communities. How? By the simple fact that we are better utilizing the materials that we have. that we are using the ingenuity and the importance of indigenous knowledge and traditional practices to create important sources of agricultural development, because we are looking at the benefits of looking waste from a resource perspective, and because we are unlocking opportunities for innovation and diversification in our agricultural industries. For all these reasons, economical, social, environmental, and also intellectual property reasons, it makes sense to harness circular economy practices to transform our food systems. And as a matter of fact, before I conclude and I announce my speakers, this webinar also helps as an input, serves as an input to the fourth Sustainable Food Systems Conference of the One Planet Network, which will soon take place from the 27th to the 28th of May in Brasilia, under the theme of advancing and sustainable food systems transformation. And we look forward also to ensuring that this process fits into the United Nations Environmental Assembly reporting process under this resolution. I have stopped this introduction, and I have the real privilege. I see here that we have a number of important speakers and presenters that are going to share their perspectives today. I will start by recognizing and appreciating our colleague, Mr. Juan Carlos Vázquez Murillo, who is the head of the Biodiversity, People and Landscape Unit at the Ecosystems Division in UNEP in Nairobi. Juan Carlos has a great wealth of experience on these topics, including in his previous assignment at the Secretariat of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, from 2015 to 2024. We also will count in the first presentation the biodiversity and the perspectives of Ms. Mónica López Conlon, who is also a Program Management Officer for Biodiversity Economy, Biodiversity, People and Landscape Unit. I am very sorry if I am mispronouncing this important unit as well, at the same Ecosystems Division where Juan Carlos is the head. We also have, and we hear the perspective of Dr. Yuta Wang, who is professor at the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering at Fudan University. And we will conclude with the perspectives of Dr. Alison Watson, who's the head of the Secretariat of the ASEAN Action Plan on Fall, Army, Worm, and Integrated Pest Management. The dynamic that we will follow and that I encourage all of us to adhere to is we are going to have very short 15-minute presentations of these distinguished panels and representatives. You are encouraged as participants, and I see that the numbers are growing, to post questions and reactions in the chat. I will be looking at those questions and attempting to animate a lively discussion with the speakers. Hopefully we will be able to ensure that participatory approach in which I will be able to mediate your interventions with the expert views that we have. We are going to be receiving from our panelists. Before we close, we will introduce the next webinar and the topics and the next steps of our approach. So without any further ado or interruptions, I would like to just confirm that Juan Carlos and Mónica are connected. I see there Juan Carlos, such a pleasure seeing you. And
thank you, Jorge.
maybe here with Mónica. Juan Carlos, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and we are delighted to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations for organizing these timely discussions on circular economy and bioeconomy. As you know, I will present a bit the context of these terms to initiate the conversation, and my colleague Monica will go into more details on what we are doing right now on these aspects. Bioeconomy serves as a critical framework for balancing economic development and environmental sustainability with social justice, and it addresses trade-off between economic growth and ecological protection ultimately enhancing the quality of lives and livelihoods for communities. And UNEP is working right now on a common vision for bioeconomy that distinguishes several meanings of the term, or rather several shades of one meaning, but in any case, a number of different concepts that we are going to discuss with you during the session. So what we suggest next, please, is to present briefly a global context and go into the bioeconomy approaches, and then present some of the activities that we are undertaking right now in our unit. So moving to the global context, we are not operating in a vacuum, and as Jorge mentioned, we have several mandates under UNEP, but also we have the global commitments adopted by member states in different MEAs, including the Convention on Biological Diversity that have adopted the global biodiversity framework. And all this is connected to the Sustainable Development Goals and the main objectives of the CBD, which are three: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of biological diversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of this biodiversity. So recently, the CBD Convention has adopted the Global Biodiversity Framework, and this framework has 23 targets, many of them relevant for our discussion on bioeconomy, including Target 5 on the sustainable use of wild species, Target 9, Target 11, Target 13 on target 17 on biotechnology. So there are several targets that are relevant for our discussion and for our work, and we would like to keep this in mind to make sure that our work contributes to achieving the goals of this global biodiversity framework, which is a global framework for all the biodiversity-related conventions, and is well connected also to the climate agenda and the climate discussions that are going to move to Berlin towards the end of the year. So if we now move into the terminology without spending too much time on the definitions, because as you will see later, we think that it's probably more productive to focus on the principles that frame this work than on definitions that may change from country to country or from different discipline sectors, economic sectors, etc. But we have identified, as I mentioned at the beginning, several meanings of the term bioeconomy, including the bio-based economies that are also known as bioeconomy, referring to the economic activity involving the use of biotechnology. So a strong focus on biotechnology and biomass. We have green economy that is improving human well-being and builds social equity while reducing environmental risk. We have bioeconomy as well as such, that is mainly referring to sectors like the health sector, the industrial and agro-industry, and encompasses biotechnological activities and processes. We have blue economy, mainly moving to the sea and the marine environment, and this is used for ocean resources and for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs. We have the term mentioned by Jorge, which is the main term used during this webinars, that is circular economy, which is a circular concept advocating for a transition from a linear economy characterized by resource extraction, use, and disposal towards a circular economy that prioritizes regeneration and sustainability. And we have biodiversity economy, or what we also call wild biodiversity economy or socio-bioeconomy or wildlife economy, that is mainly linked to objective 2 of the CBD, even if the other 2 objectives are relevant, which are related to the sustainable use of biodiversity. According, as I mentioned before, and that's the key message we want to share with you, is that before spending time on definitions, perhaps we need to see the principles that inform the discussion, because the great risk is greenwashing. So not all economic activities related to nature are bioeconomy, and there are many business as usual that now are wearing green clothes and calling themselves bioeconomy. So that's why I will pass the floor now to my colleague Monica Lopez to share with you the 10 principles adopted by the G20 last year in Brazil and share with us some concrete examples on what we are doing on this area. Monica, over to you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be participating in this webinar. And as Juan Carlos mentioned, sometimes if we get lost in the definitions, different countries say the same word, but they mean completely different approaches. So sometimes that might not help us move forward. So we thought that given that last year, the G20 initiative on bioeconomy was established for the first time as part of a G20 group meeting. And they, after many arduous months of debates, finally reached these 10 high-level principles on bioeconomy. So we wanted to share them because we feel like a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the approaches that we feel would be most fair, sustainable, equitable economic development are met by these high-level principles. So I will just go through them, but yeah, like somebody asked whether we could share the presentations, of course, and these are also available online. So yeah, so one of the first things, of course, is to integrate and promote the sustainable development across the 3 pillars of the sustainable development, making sure that we uphold the rights of all persons, including indigenous peoples, local communities, and we promote gender equality and stakeholder participation. We also want to make sure that we advance the efforts against global climate change and the multilateral climate agreements. And we want to make sure that we contribute to the conservation of biodiversity and the fair sharing of benefits from genetic resources and traditional knowledge. These high-level principles also promote the efficient and circular use of biological resources and restoration of degraded areas. We want to make sure that development happens through safe, secure, and responsible use of science, but science also traditional knowledge, making sure that those two are kept into account, as well as technology and innovation. We want to benefit from a robust policy frameworks that foster trade, sustainable business models, decent jobs, and local value creation. And I will go back to this number 7 high-level principle in a minute. We want to make sure that we utilize transparent, science-based criteria throughout the value chain. So we don't focus just on the consumer, or we don't focus just on within the farm gates, but we make sure that throughout the value chain. We want to make sure that international cooperation is fostered and that helps us to address global challenges. And we want to, of course, implement in line with each of the national priorities. And I think that's why it's so important that each of the countries have gone through their determination of their GBF targets, and they're the ones who are monitoring their SDGs. So this year, the G20 is actually focusing on ensuring that we develop standards and metrics for these high-level principles, so that we ensure that we don't use the word sustainability or conservation freely, but we actually attach numbers and KPIs to it. And in terms of the robust policy frameworks, this is another one of the principles that's going to be discussed at the end of this month at the G20 meeting for bioeconomy. So I just wanted to highlight that with everyone. So why do we decide to focus more on the biodiversity economy? So it's true that sometimes economies struggle to realize the value of biodiversity and the landscapes that we can foster to achieve sustainable and equitable outcomes for people and biodiversity. And as we mentioned, there are some bioeconomy, bio-based activities that are not always sustainable, equitable, or fair, or just. So that's why we aim to advocate for these high-level principles. And there are significant opportunities that will help us accelerate these solutions that make the economic needs compatible with the social and environmental aspects. So it's defined as a sustainable use of biodiversity for the people and the future. And some of the activities that we have defined, we see here at the bottom, are that the non-timber forest products, ecotourism, ranching, also known as game farming, fishing, hunting, foraging, trapping, bioprospecting, carbon markets, biodiversity markets, and payment for ecosystem services. So as part of the work that we do in our team, we've been doing some scoping reports, and these are some of the activities that have come back that show that we can actually do, nature can drive economic transformation. So we carried out state of knowledge reports in different regions, Asia and the Pacific, Europe, Latin America and Caribbean, and North America. And there was already very good report done by the Africa Leadership University, which we also used. And those reports that brought very good best practices from different areas, they also managed to explain what are the common threads between them, but also what makes biodiversity economy different in different contexts, were finished early this year. And it's been very useful for us to define how we could move forward and how we could support countries doing it. So some of the key findings from those scoping studies was the similar terms that are used in the regions where they have successful case studies. Also the importance and the need to focus on the strengthening and scaling up of the biodiversity economy business case, value chains and finance mechanisms. So we would like to promote case studies that show that it's very important to focus on these. Something else that was found is that wild species, wildlife, and their potential to contribute to economic development and social equity are currently not valued enough. So that's something else that we would appreciate focusing on. And also, of course, partnerships and robust regulatory frameworks are essential for unlocking this biodiversity economy. And what we are focusing on, our program focus would be creating the credible data and information, making the case for these biodiversity-based value chains, and also informing policies, plans, strategies, using this evidence that nature can indeed drive equitable economic transformation. So these are our contacts. Vanessa Tiaba, who hasn't presented but is part of the audience, is an integral part of our team, and that these are our contacts in case there's anything you want to follow up on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, Monica, and indeed Vanessa, for providing this perspective and also updating on the important milestone that was the development of the G20 principles on bioeconomy and the relationship that bioeconomy has with circularity. And this is precisely the topic that it's going to be further advanced by Dr. Yutao Wang, who is connected. And Dr. Wang is professor at Department of Environmental Science and Engineering at Fudan University. Dr. Yutao Wang is, as I already mentioned, a distinguished professor who has authored over 120 papers in leading journals such as Nature, Environmental Science, and Global Environmental Change. Dr. Wang's research addresses key sustainability challenges, including the role of bioeconomy in advancing sustainable industrial practices and reducing global land use emissions and impacts on the ecosystems and the biodiversity. Dr. Yutao will speak to us on the connection between bioeconomy, which by now we all understand that there are quite a number of concepts and they all more or less address the transitions to sustainable development, but from different complementary perspectives. The role, and I personally look very much to this presentation on advancing the transition to a sustainable and circular agri-food bioeconomy. Dr. Wang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's my great honor to join this webinar. I'm Yutao Wang from Fudan University, based in Shanghai, China. I think everyone in this room knows that shifting from the fossil-based material or resources to bio-based material resources is very crucial because it has been, the bioeconomy has been considered as a game changer for climate action. This is a paper published on Nature a few years ago. If we see the left chart, that the extraction of the living biomass has grown a lot rapidly in the last few decades. Actually, all those show that the biomass resources is very important. It's a very vital foundation for sustainable development, and advancing the development of bioeconomy is very key pathway to address climate change and achieving SDGs. And I think the previous speaker already make analysis and show how important it is of bioeconomy linked with multiple UN SDGs. So we can see that by building a circular bioeconomy is very important to support the SDGs achievement. And well, there was already definition discussions. And here I think we can just look into the figures in bottom on the left-hand side. It's very interesting to see the overlap, the intersection between the circular economy concept and bioeconomy concept. And this come to the circular bioeconomy concepts from my understanding, and talking about to closing the loop, to relying on the renewables, but it has to be biomass, and also to considering the maximum use of the materials, improve the efficiency and equity as well. I think in this figure is more clearly show that we can use the abundance of renewable raw materials from the ecosystem to power the circular bioeconomy, and by the technology transfer that we can deliver the products, different kinds of products like fuels, power, materials, chemicals, biochar. So all those actually what we can produce today from the fossil-based material, fossil-based resources can be actually technically made from biomass or bio-based material. And also when it comes to the resource classification, there are mainly three generations. So first generation, I think in this webinar we talked more on this generation, which need to emphasize the balancing between the food and fuel. So it's more food-related sources like corn, sugarcane, soybean, and other like oil crops. And the second generation, we're talking about that unlocking the power of non-edible biomass, like the residues from the agriculture and also like the waste from the food. And also third generation, which is under quickly development, like the algae or advanced synthesis. And here is a chart that if we, sorry, the character is very small, but we can see actually from this biomass feedstock, like crops, oil seeds, algae, livestock manure, organic waste oil, that by different kind of technology, conservation technology, actually we can produce different energy source, like a jet fuel, biodiesel, electricity, methane, etc. So there are key policies that we need to bear in mind to develop a circular bioeconomy for food and agriculture. And we will come back to this later. So before that, I would like to give a case. So it is from the ancient China, already happened, was built more than 2,500 years ago, even back into the spring and autumn period, and also become more common during the Tang Dynasty in the Pearl River Delta region in China. So it's called the Mulberry Nile fish-pond system. And actually, it's just to think about how to closing the circle of the nutrition, and from the mulberry tree to the leaf and to silkworm, and also to then back to the pond fishing, and then to the soil, and then back to the circle. So it's a very excellent, brilliant idea from the Asian people. And nowadays, actually, with the more comprehensive knowledge from the science that has been introduced into optimize the growing process and build a stereo cultivation model to extend the production chain, that from the like a stock food analysis, we are be able to know more accurate about how much like a biomass we can receive, and how much nutrition, how much energy, to make the whole process more complex, to emphasize the efficiency. And it actually is also similar, inherited from the ancient principles of the first food type bioeconomy, that the others like corn, soybean, etc. also follow the same principles. Like there's a case I would like to give to you from Shandong province, where I was born. There's a company called Shandong Long-Lived Biotechnology company, which was built back into 2001. And generally speaking, it used corn as raw material to produce like functional food. but also new energy sources like ethanol, gasoline, jet fuel, and also develop new materials to produce like a new tire, and also to use for power generation. Sorry. And another case I would like to emphasize is about the soybean. The soybean is one of the major crops throughout the whole world, like North America, South America, Asia. And it has not been used only for food and feed. If we look into the right chart here, we can see that direct human food needs only accounts for 90.2%, and then large amount of that used for animal food and to produce meat for the human food needs later. But also there are increasingly more used for the industry sectors, not only for energy purpose, but also for like new materials like bioplastics, etc. And I think this soybean is one of the most economically important decoded crop in the world. I would also like to address a little bit about the residue, how to use the residue from the agri-food system, like the straw for pulp and paper making sector. And the paper making sector is a very traditional sector, relying on agriculture cultivation residues or forest materials. And it's one of the most energy intensive sector when it comes to manufacturing worldwide, and also one large emitters when it comes to CO2. But today, actually, together with the development of a circular bioeconomy, this sector has a big potential become a biorefinery sector. We have seen that already happening worldwide. Like there's a company called Suzano, one of the biggest pulp making company in Brazil, is already using changing their production line to produce like new fibers for clothing purpose. So we can see that actually the pulp and paper industry sectors, it's very important, plays a very important role in transition to circular bioeconomy, especially when it comes to using the residues of the agriculture, because that can generate new issues if we don't handle the waste, the residue properly. Like an open pit fire can generate a lot of PM 2.5. It's a big issue for like China and India, the developing world. So we have seen the very good potential and also the benefits of the bioeconomy, a circular bioeconomy, but there are also inconvenient impacts, as the previous speaker already addressed. So here are two examples I would like to give from a few research papers, like the palm oil. There are competitions for the final use purpose between the different regions, but also the oil palm plantation expansion, like in South Asia, East Asia, already caused a lot of carbon sink loss, and also the bioenergy expansion, which present a threat to biodiversity globally. And we also need to recognize the impact of bioeconomy and land use, and this development of bioeconomy for the purpose of energy or chemical materials can drive the direct impacts or indirect impacts on the land use, and lead to consequences if that has not been properly managed, like greenhouse emissions, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, etc. But we also need to realize the climate vulnerability of bioeconomy. So on the one hand, we try to develop the bioeconomy as a response to climate change, but the climate change is already happening. So those sudden event or slow onset events actually will already have a profound impacts on the bioeconomy sectors, especially on the supply chain, such as and on the like agriculture, fishery, and forestry side. On the right hand, we can see a very interesting paper published a few years ago talking about extreme weather events can bring the decrease in the global beer supply. Actually, that can the ideas or the lessons from this study can also apply to the other circular bioeconomy sectors in the agri-food system. And also, as mentioned by the previous speakers, that we need to realize the interactions between the bioeconomy and biodiversity. This table summarizes the pathways and mechanisms through the with the bioeconomy influence the biodiversity. There are good parts, but there are also negative parts. And then how to establish a sustainable circular bioeconomy to And we need to have more. I think the previous speaker already mentioned a lot, but here I want to emphasize that we need to think about a system approach to have the policy, technology innovation, sustainability, economic, and together think about a greener future for the bioeconomy development. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yutao. And this presentation was, if everyone can mute their microphone, I have to say that this and the previous presentations have been very enlightening. And I personally regret that I did not have the time to look into detail in the rich information that you were sharing in your presentation. I particularly captured in my mind two slides. The first one in which you showed the example of the pulp fabrication, the paper example, from a bioeconomy perspective, and I was reflecting on the specific case of the sugarcane, which is a very rich pulp and fiber plant, and how, in a way, it also helps to diversify sources for creation of pulp and creation of byproducts. The second one, it was the slide in which you presented two graphs to think circularity and bioeconomy, including one with a cycle assessment framework, which I believe have to be further studied. Finally, and I think we were very short when you presented UNEP's in seminal publication on bioeconomy, which was coordinated by the IEMP, our sister think tank in Beijing, and in which I'm sure you participated. So the reason why I'm telling this is because we are updating a small website in which we are collecting all these presentations, and these are available for all of you, or will be made available for all of you to look and further study in order to strengthen the case for circularity in sugarcane, in a number of other crops, in a number of other agricultural practices as well, and continuous thinking of bioeconomy approaches and its connection with circularity. So thank you, Professor. Stay here with us. We may have some additional questions. And thank you for staying a bit late. The last speaker is Dr. Alison Watson, who's the head of the Secretariat, I already mentioned, of the ASEAN Action Plan on the Fall Army Worm and Integrated Pest Management, and director of the Agri-Food Systems Collab. I am sure that Dr. Watson will be able to share with us good examples. I personally learned one from the sugarcane industry, which, of course, being this the resolution that we're discussing, and an important topic as well, in which I learned that a number of the components in the plant itself can be turned into very powerful pesticides, right? Natural bioeconomy pesticides, and nature provides us solutions that we don't need to go there and fabricate with very heavy industrial processes. And sometimes we just have to look at that from the bioeconomy and the circularity perspective. So, Dr. Allison, thank you for joining us and for highlighting the importance of considering gender perspectives in progressive, inclusive, and climate-resilient circular economy approaches in agri-food systems. What is the ASEAN FAO action plan about? Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm just making sure you can see my screen okay. Excellent. And I'm going to turn my video off just to save a little bit of bandwidth, but I will turn it on if there's any discussion and questions at the end. So just quickly, so thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's a real pleasure to be part of this important series on advancing circular, regenerative, and bioeconomy approaches in agricultural value chains. Before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge that this is really a team effort and involves a huge amount of support from many different organisations and experts. A big thanks especially to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment of Vietnam for being lead supporters of this work, and of course ASEAN, and the more than 40 researchers around Southeast Asia who are working together on understanding the role of gender in advancing sustainable food systems. Now, the focus of the program I'm going to present today is in Southeast Asia, which includes the countries of Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, collectively part of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. And these countries are a significant producer of food for a large and growing population of nearly 700 million people. And with over 3.6 billion people in neighbouring East and South Asia, Southeast Asia is also well positioned to supply food to a substantial share of the global population, meaning achieving circular, sustainable food system outcomes will be extremely important. Notably, up to 100 million smallholders live and produce food in this region, underscoring the sector's critical role in rural livelihoods and regional food security. Southeast Asia's agri-food systems are extremely vulnerable to climate change. A number of countries are actually amongst the most vulnerable countries globally to a changing and unpredictable climate. And the region is very rich in biodiversity. A circular economy approach offers pathways to enhance much needed resilience to the region. However, to ensure effective long-term change, the design, development, and implementation of activities to support farmers must embrace from the outset inclusive, gender-sensitive, and transformative approaches. But how do we help 700 million farmers, mostly farming 2 hectares or less, to minimise waste and environmental impact, optimise resource use in the bioeconomy, maximise value, and build resistance? It's a real challenging task. Moving from a linear economy towards one that is more circular requires people embracing new habits, behaviours, activities, tools, technologies, adoption of circular practices, processes, and products. And new systems are needed to support this change. Today, I'm going to illustrate a small part of this complex puzzle, and that is the importance of inclusive gender approaches to driving agri-food circularity. I'm going to use examples from projects we're undertaking in Southeast Asia. And I'll be using the work we're doing under the IPM Leaders Program, that's Integrated Pest Management, one of 7 thematic programs of the ASEAN Fall Armyworm Action Plan, to provide examples. The program is a cross-cutting initiative designed to support long-term sustainable change in agricultural communities towards integrated pest management. And if you want more information about the ASEAN Fall Armyworm Action Plan, a regional-wide program focusing on building communication, capability, and capacity on responding to key crop pests and diseases, please see our website at www.aseanfawaction.org. Now, a gender lens, it's just important to have a quick discussion on this, just so that we're starting from the same point. But a gender lens is about women and men. It's about communities. It considers diverse identities, including women, men, and gender diverse people, recognizing how intersecting factors such as class, ethnicity, disability interact with gender. It's not about judging different roles, customs, religions, perceptions, but it questions how and why gender differences exist in experiences, access, needs, and outcomes. It may reveal power differences and inequalities, and it may challenge unequal gender relations and discriminatory norms and practices. And it should investigate ways to change those norms and practices and to empower both women and men in more sustainable practices and livelihoods. Lastly, a gender lens in your work is just good business. Robust research, meaningful policy making. We should know who and how, why decisions are being made, so we can seek to nudge behaviour and support people towards more positive environmental, economic, and social outcomes for a healthy planet and healthy people. And if we want to support circularity in achieving regenerative food systems, it's clear that we need to do a better job of knowing more about our farmers. We need better quantitative and qualitative data. And I'll emphasise that the generation and analysis of sex disaggregated data is essential for evidence-based policy development. Without this data, it's not possible to have a full understanding of women's and men's roles, status, and contributions in agriculture. And I emphasise this because a significant amount of research and policy related to agricultural production involves interviewing involving only men. for many reasons. It could be poor survey design, it could be farm ownership. Men are often listed in local government records as the farm owners, so they're surveyed or involved first in projects. There could be perceptions about who are the lead farmers. There's shyness factors. There's a lack of women networks in some cases. There are cultural barriers and language and time constraints. But this is a key barrier to the effective design of policies that drive circular food system outcomes. We also need to be curious. If we want to achieve a transformation of our food systems to embrace circularity, who are our farmers? Who is making decisions and how? And who has knowledge and who doesn't? What are farmers finding challenging in their day-to-day activities? Today, I'm going to talk about a project that we have implemented with over 20 organisations, 40 plus researchers across 5 countries in Southeast Asia and 3 cropping systems to better understand how men and women produce certain crops and manage pests. The teams have interviewed over 1,200 farmers through a variety of different modes, household surveys, interviews, focus group discussions, for example, across many locations. And if you want more information about these projects, you can use the links below. Now, some of the points I want to illustrate, I'm going to run through now from that project. And one is that context is critical. Gender dynamics can be very different in different locations, within a country and between countries. You have to take the time to know your farmers to understand how to design interventions that might work over the long term. And we asked here over 190 women farmers what tasks they were involved in related to banana production on their farms in 4 countries. And we found many interesting differences and similarities, providing valuable insight into different norms, patterns, behaviour and locations that are important in understanding how to better design responsive and relevant programs and policies. Now, weeding is a common activity you'll see there undertaken by women in all 4 countries. It was an activity especially heavily engaged in Indonesia, Vietnam and Laos. Applying fertilisers is another common activity by more than 70% of women respondents in Indonesia, Philippines and Vietnam, but not so much in Laos, where only 27% of women said they were involved in that activity. On the other hand, 72% of women in Indonesia are involved in post-harvesting activities compared to much lower numbers in other countries, from 14 to 32%. So it's really important to then ask ourselves, what does this mean to how we, for example, develop training? What new technologies might be needed to save time and labour on some of these tasks, and can women access them? What it also shows us is that women are involved in many tasks in banana production. So are we involving them effectively in our policy and project design? Importantly, women are not a homogenous group. They differ according to country, but also just as much within a country. So even within a country, the differences can be very large between locations. And for example, this study looks at maize farming in 2 locations in Indonesia, and it shows that around 90% of women respondents in Central Java said they were involved in weeding activities, while only 30% of women in Lampung province said they did this. And only a very small proportion of women in Lampung were also involved in land preparation, less than 10%, although 87% of them were involved with planting seeds. There's also differences in what men indicate they are doing between locations, but perhaps not as much as women, which is an interesting why question. But for example, planting seeds and changing planting times or choosing crops, there are some differences there according to the location. And these are key activities you might target in a circular agriculture project. So it's very important information to know, because when we design, develop, implement and evaluate new projects, programs and policies, we really need to understand that gender can be very context specific. And we found, for example, that how far a location was from an urban centre had a big impact on women's access to training, use of pesticides and access to knowledge. Another talking point is a myth that we often hear. When we started our research, we had a lot of discussions around whether women were involved in maize production and pest and disease control. There was a kind of a myth that cash crop production was a man's job, while women looked after other crops like vegetables. And it's kind of surprising, really, when you look back that we didn't really know this information, because this is part of a much larger regional project on how to support farmers to manage a new invasive species, the fall armyworm, which causes significant economic damage and leads often to the huge overuse of pesticides. So not knowing what women and men farmers are doing is a pretty big barrier to understanding how to support change. So we developed a research study across 5 countries to ask these very simple questions related to what are the roles of men and women in maize production. An example here is from Indonesia, which looked at maize production in 2 very different locations, Lampung and Java. And we've actually aggregated the responses from men and women at both sites to give us an idea on what activities women say they're involved in related to maize production and what men say women are involved in. And what you can see here is that indeed women are involved in maize production, and for certain activities they are very involved, such as in planting and fertilizer application. Now, the pink bars are the responses by women about the jobs they do, and the blue bars represent what men say women do. And I'm highlighting this because this is why it's very important to ensure you have gender disaggregated data when looking at farmer behaviour. If you interview men only, which often happens, you run the real risk of not seeing the real crucial roles that women play. And for example, in our studies in general, men underestimated the roles of women by at least 10% compared to women, and sometimes larger in certain places. But there's always exceptions. And this is in Vietnam, because they are one of these exceptions. Here, women are playing a very significant role in production of maize and at the levels of men. And men are also saying this. So you can see the blue and pink lines are very similar, showing high agreement on women's involvement. Now, a note of caution, again, this is aggregated data, but if I was to show you data from the different locations in Vietnam, you'd actually see some quite big differences in roles of women across sites. And there are very different reasons for this, but one interesting reason here is where the maize produced goes to. So it's a function of the value chain also. So in the area where maize was being produced for high value feed to the dairy industry, there were very high engagement levels for women, for example. So it's very interesting to look at that as well. Now, another myth is that women are not really involved with pesticides. And I'm going to talk about this now. This was something that we really discussed a lot beforehand, but this is an example from fall armyworm in the maize study from 3 other countries in Laos, Cambodia, and Philippines. And often when we talk about pesticides, we just think about application, the farmer applying the pesticide in the field. And it's true, we did find this was predominantly a job for men farmers. But it's really important to break down the different steps and decision points in using pesticides or herbicides if we want to understand how to change behaviour. And what these results show are that women are involved in pesticide use and sometimes very involved in key decision points that could be opportunities for us to influence behaviour. Now, interestingly, across all the surveys, women had very little, almost absent, knowledge about biopesticides. Men had a little bit more, probably as a result of more exposure to training. But if we want to switch farmers to alternatives to conventional chemical pesticides, such as biopesticides, we have a lot of work to do to build knowledge and recognition of these alternatives. Location again makes a difference to pesticide use and involvement of men and women, and also the crop. So here we just focus on pesticide purchasing, the actual purchase and the decision making about what, when and how much to purchase. The orange dot represents proportion of women saying that they do this activity, and the blue is what men say that they do for this activity. And you can see here for maize, which does use a lot of chemicals, that actually men and women say they're purchasing pesticides around about in the same rate. So except for the Philippines, which shows that men do that a bit more than women. So decision making has more involvement by men in maize production, but you'll also notice in the mango production, purchasing activities are very much predominantly carried out by men. In bananas, women in Vietnam and the Philippines take a significant role. So I mentioned this slide is that I often hear men do the hard work on farms. And I really hear this a lot. I've seen it written down in quite a few draft reports. So this is a pretty strong norm that we need to challenge. I don't know if anyone here has tried weeding in a hot tropical climate for hours on end, but I can assure you it's extremely hard work and it's a job that women do quite a lot. So the belief that hard work in farming is men's domain while women do other work is quite a deep-rooted gender bias that really undervalues and often makes invisible women's labour in agriculture. And this bias can really distort how agricultural work is recognised, rewarded and supported in our policy, research and technology design. Many societies define physical labour in fields, ploughing, clearing land as hard work and masculine, while assigning tasks like planting, weeding, harvesting, seed saving, post-harvest processing to women, and they're often unpaid and undervalued. Women are also often juggling multiple jobs on the farm and in the household and are mostly responsible for childcare. So they do work often longer hours when both farm and domestic labour are continued. So it's really important to consider what is hard work when we define our programs and develop them. Perceptions of who holds knowledge can be a barrier to empowerment, and I just wanted to show you a few results here from our study. What this is in our 3 mango countries, so it was Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, is that here in the Philippines, when asked, 64% of men and women say women have less knowledge than men. In Vietnam, 83% of farmers say women have less knowledge on mango production and pest and disease management. So it's very high numbers. And it's really very important to know this when designing an inclusive program. The bottom figure again demonstrates that the specific location also makes a big difference. For example, there were 3 locations in Indonesia, and you can see in one of these locations that 92% of all farmers said women had less knowledge, whereas in another location this was much lower. And it's often a reflection of many factors like training and education, but it's very important to understand. So something that you need to think about is understanding this and then looking at how do you improve knowledge amongst women and men. And I wanted to talk about that as we provide training to farmers. And that is one of the ways that we do increase knowledge, except we don't provide enough training to men and women farmers often, and especially not to women. And what we found across our research was actually the training was actually quite low for men and women. And farmers were actually really curious and actually were really enthusiastic about having more training. In mango production, women had much less access to training. So you can see here that of the 84%, of the 56% of people who received training, 84% of those were men. So women were really receiving virtually only 10% of the training. In maize, it's a little bit different, but women had much less access to training in Indonesia compared to other countries. But you'll see with the blue lines there that Cambodia had very good access for women, which is very similar to men. So there are differences as well according to the country. In addition, I just point out the last one is around bananas, banana production there, and you'll see that women there had much less access to training in Indonesia, Laos, and Philippines. In Vietnam, it was similar, but in Vietnam, both men and women, there was very low levels of training at all. So it was really a problem about access for training for anyone in Vietnam. Talking point access technology, and this is one of my last slides, so I'm moving through quite quickly now, sorry. But I just wanted to share with you that everyone thinks that everyone's got smartphones and that they're all connected to the internet, and that's not quite true, but it does differ according to the crop as well. Maize farmers seem to have very good access to phones and internet access. But if you look at some of the other crops, this is not true, and it's particularly not true for banana farmers. You can see there are a lot of people that don't have any access to any phone. Internet access is also extremely low, and it's quite low for bananas and some other key crops and locations. And this is really important when we're designing communication, but also when we're thinking about access to new technologies, new information, connection to social media and networks. And it's a really important part of, I think, of the design of circular solutions in the future. Just a common trap here is that this happens a lot. This is from a published, examples from a published paper. And I just want to show that often you'll see a lot of research that talks about farmers, but we don't know whether they're men or women. This paper was actually interviewing 56 farmers about the impacts on women of a particular project, but the farmers were not women, they were all men. And you'll see here some gendered bias that creeps into a lot of research as well, talking about the wife of the head of the whole household, and that the majority of spouses only act as homemakers. So really already you can see some gendered sort of bias coming into even the researchers' conclusions. And even looking at the results there of the project, we can see very small positive changes, which will be in the margin of error, and actually a negative change for women around access to credit, for example. Which is and technology. So they're actually having less of that after the project. So it's really important that we also increase our skills in research and program development with applying a gender lens, and that's on all of us to do. So summary here. My last two slides, I just wanted to say that applying a gender lens in circular agriculture is crucial. It ensures that the design, implementation, and benefits of the circular food systems are equitably shared, and that no one, especially women who make up a significant portion of the agricultural workforce, is left behind. It's just key to think about a gender lens as analytical, inclusive, transformative, embedded in the research process, and practical. It's not an add-on. It's not synonymous with women's issues. It's not neutral. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not about excluding men. And so last, I just want to finish with a sort of call for action is you just need to get started on this stuff. Don't be afraid to have a go. You learn by doing. It's really important that we all do that. Ask yourself, can I hear the voices of women and men farmers in my work? And if that's a no, then you're not doing the right thing. You need to rethink your design. And if you can hear those voices, ask yourself, what are they telling me that I need to focus on to better involve and support them in driving circular agricultural practices and outcomes? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Alison, for this super insightful presentation and for reminding us of a number of aspects. One, in your concluding slide, you really highlighted how central it is to think of systemic transformation, social engagement, and bringing the farmers along as we promote transitions towards more circular economy and circular bioeconomy approaches. The central message, it's also very well heard in that in understanding the interventions that we need to do, whether these are capacity building interventions, financing, innovative financing interventions, whether these are introduction of new products. And you did mention the key point that I have highlighted from a number of crops, that is the use of biopesticides, which is a critical one. How we need to have a gender lens perspective, right? And this certainly will inform our thinking in the next webinars. As I move to the question and answer, I do want to recognize Dr. Jorge Fernandez Chamero, who is a Program Operations Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist at the Food and Agriculture Organization Country Office in Cuba. Dr. Fernandez was not able to join us today owing to personal reasons, but although we wish him well, we will definitely try to get his slides and upload them in our website. Dr. Fernandez was expected to present the presentation on the circularity from a bioeconomy perspective of the sugarcane industry in Cuba, but we will definitely come back to this topic again. Nevertheless, we have a few minutes, and I have seen that quite a number of participants have put questions, and many have been answered live, which make my life a bit easier. But I would like to ask and trigger a discussion with the experts. And if I miss a question, I see here that 4 are coming, and colleagues, you can see it well. Let me start with one of the questions that is here from Sukra Laotan, and it really touches upon Alison's presentation, and we can hear a number of other perspectives. Talking about gender in agri-food training is important, but more focus should be on effective, innovative agricultural practices instead of just traditional ones. I think that this is a very interesting question on how can we bring innovation in a very specific social context. How do we ensure buying into these approaches from the farmers with a gender perspective? And this is a question that I think applies to all, not only Alison, but Juan Carlos, Monica, and Yuto. So I propose that we just take it for all of you, and I will start with you. Alison, very briefly, you've elaborated, but what can you add to this point?
Yeah, I mean, this is just very true. I just focused on training, but even if you were to introduce a new innovative agricultural practice, you're going to have to involve a training element in that. So it still goes back to the farmer understanding what their needs are and understanding whether it helps them get to where they want to go as well. So often I've seen projects where it's a great idea, and the project researcher goes in and gives all the tools and develops it, and it should just work fine. And then the researcher leaves and they go back to visit in a year later and they wonder why their new technology wasn't adopted. So it still goes back to really developing that relationship and developing that innovation together. So having a two-way innovation. And I think that is a really important focus going forward.
Let me unmute myself. Dr. Wang, this is also interesting topic for your research. You presented a number of insightful case studies, and I believe that this topic is interesting. How do you, in these cases, how did communities came along? How did we help them to embrace perhaps a new way of doing things? Or how do we help mainstream traditional ways that have been done for many, many hundreds of years? Then we have new industrial practices, and then we went back to more traditional approaches. How do you ensure communities and farmers buying in and uptake in a very specific context?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's I think that first of all, it depends, and depends on the context and depends on the regions and what kind of a bioeconomy models we're trying to develop. I think on one hand, it's very much economic driven, like the palm oil expansion in Southeast Asia. On one hand, it brings income for their families to reach the education levels. It's the good benefits to increase their income. And on the other hand, if it's not managed properly, there will be consequences like biodiversity loss and carbon loss. So I think we need to have, from the Chinese experience, that it's better to have an overview plan and what kind of bioeconomy, and also we think about the whole system, which area we need to be careful and to over the, so we call it ecological red line, to bring more feedback consequences to the ecosystem. And also I very agree that I recently went to Sri Lanka. There's a 10-year collaboration project between the Chinese CES and their local universities for clean water supply. Well, I think the experience we learned from that 10 years collaboration can also apply to the bioeconomy technology transfer and collaborations between the countries to countries. So we need to help scientists, especially from the developed countries, from emerging for the emerging technology, to share the knowledge, and to also to make it not only consider whether it's advanced or not, but also think about whether it's suitable to suit for the local context, the economic social status, and then to have the technology transfer training scheme, etc., to ensure we can boost the sustainable bioeconomy.
Thank you, Doctor. To Juan Carlos and Monica, building on the same line, what are the main enablers to unlock and scale up the bioeconomy agenda?
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you to the other panelists. Very interesting presentations. We learned a lot. Perhaps before responding to that, let me say something quickly on the other question, because I think that I remember the Minister of Indigenous Affairs of Brazil saying sometimes the future is ancestral. So traditional things depends of what traditional things are we talking about, if the traditional agricultural practices or the traditional knowledge of the indigenous communities that probably are quite advanced compared to what we have used as agricultural practices in the 20th century. So one of the enablers is to also collect this science, not only the innovative science used with responsibility, innovation, technology, but also all this traditional knowledge from these indigenous people and local communities that have experience in using nature without not at the expense or not causing detriment to nature. So we have, we need to work with the communities and paying attention to the gender aspects as highlighted by Alison. We need to invest in new technologies, and now several universities are progressing fast in the use of insects, for instance, for all kind of purposes, including food security, but also for controlling plagues and infections in the crops. And also in the enabling conditions, we need to think of the national policies, the legislation, the planning processes. And I think that what we mentioned, the CBD, they have a tool that are the MBSAPs, to include in these MBSAPs some of these actions that you are identifying in these conversations, but also the NDCs of the Climate Change Convention and the land neutrality aspects of the UNCCD Convention. So we have information systems research, we have policy instruments, involvement, engagement of communities and the private sector into the development of innovative practices, and the support of the international community, which is where I think that UNEP can play a role. And I think that the One Planet network and what you are doing there, Jorge, plays an important role in supporting these initiatives. Monica may have something to add if we have time, Jorge.
Absolutely. Yes, we do have time for one last round. So let's start with Monica for you to complement. And also I saw a comment in the answer, but about the use of data standards and metrics. Perhaps you want to complement, Monica, what UNEP has to offer in this regard. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much. And thanks to the other panelists, and thanks, Juan Carlos, for that answer. I completely agree. Maybe I will focus on one of the things you mentioned, which is like the private sector. And this is something that I've learned also from the circularity approach. Sometimes us creating the link between what is happening at the community level or at the protected areas level and a bigger market, creating that link in a way that's going to be beneficial, fair, just. I think that could also help a lot to unlock the potential of the biodiversity economy. And maybe that's something that we could support with. Regarding the standards and metrics, I think it's really important that we don't think, oh, just because we're calling it bioeconomy, we're doing the right thing, but we actually have some indicators to prove that that is correct. So as I mentioned in the answer, the current G20 presidency, which is South Africa, set themselves as one of the priorities to develop these standards and metrics for all the high-level principles. I'm not sure it's going to be able to be done in 1 year, but I think that's an agenda that it would be great if we could all support and follow through. So it was started, they started developing this in October last year, and they're going to be working throughout the next year. And it's always in a participatory manner. The documents are usually public for all of those who participate in the meetings. And then at the end of their presidency, they will probably share what they've managed to agree upon. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Monica and Juan Carlos, for supporting this effort and for the great work you are doing. Dr. Alison Watson, um, we heard also the same component. How is it important to now to work with the communities and learn the context? How is it important also to simplify? I like the comment that our colleague James Lomax just put here. I like in the presentation, as you saw from Monica and colleagues, there is a word soup. We talk about circularity, we talk about bioeconomy, we talk about regenerative practices. At the end of the day, we are all addressing sustainable agricultural practices, right? And we're speaking about the same objective with slightly different lenses. So, what is one of the hardest skills to pick up for a researcher or a policymaker that wants to incorporate a gender lens in their work, including by making sense of all these different approaches? So, where do we start, and what are the two top recommendations that you would like to make?
I think the hardest thing for everyone is sometimes remaining open and just listening to other people, listening to farmers. I am always struck by the amount of researchers, because I work with a lot of them now as part of this project, who come back to me and say, wow, it was so interesting and exciting, and I found out so much information by going to talk to a whole group of farmers for 2 days and really asking them all these questions about what they do and what they do in the household and what they do on the farm. So it's keeping that sort of openness to actually explore and ask questions and listen. And yes, there are always going to be a lot of definitions as well. So you've got to keep yourself open to those. People have different emphasis on different words, and that's fine. The key thing is the action. You know, we all have to do as many things as possible to resolve these very complex, wicked problems that we're facing in our world. And if people want to approach them in slightly different ways, fantastic. We just want everyone to try to do something. So getting started is my key advice, in that just start, because you learn by doing, and you can talk about a lot of this stuff for a long time. And we've just developed a big program, online learning program, to develop skills and capability and using a gender lens in agriculture. And what we found is it wasn't until students actually sat down and started doing an applied project and started talking to farmers that was the point where they were really started to struggle, but that's the point where they learnt the most. So I'd say get started.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate as well your engagement and presentation. Dr. Wang, in asking you to provide your concluding remarks, we would like to also ask you, what is your take? Because countries are in different stages of development, and you have emphasized and spoken on the importance of the context-driven approaches. So, from your perspective, and this is something that I thought it would be interesting to hear, it is what are the top 2 or 3 factors to consider in advancing a bioeconomy strategy across different regions, across different countries? What are the top 2 or 3 actions that need to be thought in this regard in promoting, as we said, what we're looking at, sustainable agricultural practices? Over.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I think it's also a difficult question to answer, because it's very much depending on the region, the context. Because we know, actually, last year we published a paper talking about the country-specific strategies for the pulp and paper sectors to achieve carbon neutrality. And we found actually the resource endowment, the energy mix, the social economic status, energy efficiency, waste management, all those factors actually contribute to the pathway for different countries. So I think when it comes to bioeconomy, we need to think about also, first of all, like the resource endowment. You know, in different regions can be very different. Which one we should really rely on or try to develop. And also, I think secondly, the social economic status. I think also just consider the economy, but also the equity of the society, also the I think as the previous speaker addressed, the gender balance and quality is all important. And as third, I think the biodiversity loss, and we need to really be careful when expanding the bioeconomy in those hotspot area when it comes to biodiversity. I think this also answer to Alison the question, is there any potential issue with over-relying on the one single approach when it comes to the circular bioeconomy? So yes, it will definitely bring issues. We need to think about the local context, and especially we need to think about like the biodiversity loss, as I said. So I think the three elements are very important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yuta Wang, for that answer and for your presentation and participation. This concludes our first webinar in support of enhancing uptake, experience sharing, and knowledge creation associated to the implementation of UNEA resolution 6.1, circularity of a resilient, low-carbon sugarcane agro-industry. We want to conclude by, as I already mentioned, inviting all of you to register for virtual attendance to the 5th Global Conference of the Sustainable Food Systems Program of the One Planet Network, which now I will quote correctly the theme, which builds a number of things that we have discussed, that it's about coherent policies and equity-sensitive solutions to simultaneously fight hunger and malnutrition, biodiversity loss, and the climate crisis. And today we discussed that whether we call it bioeconomy, circular economy, we are in fact looking at solutions that bring these three dimensions together. So please link and connect and register to the conference. Our second webinar, which will focus more specifically in translating these different approaches, specifically to the sugarcane value chain, will take place early in June. I will ask my colleagues to put in the chat the exact date, and we hope you will hear from us very soon. If you are not registered, please register for our mailing list in the One Planet Network website to be able to share with you the news. And we hope to see you all there in the first week of June, in which we will also communicate the outcomes of the Global Conference of the Sustainable Food Systems Program. We will be holding a third seminar at the end of the month of June, if I am correct in this in the dates, which will look as well at the use of, we will continue discussing gender perspectives, use of pesticides, and increased promotion of sustainable farming practices. I want to appreciate all of you that stayed connected, and wishing you all an excellent afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.